Hollywood has always sold us the dream. But what if the dream factory ran on broken childhoods and shattered innocence? Behind the dazzling lights of MGM's golden era, child stars weren't just acting. They were assets, wrung dry for every cent, every smile, every ticket sold. Think you know what went on behind those velvet curtains? What would you say if I told you that the kids you grew up watching paid the ultimate price for your favorite classics? Stick around. Some of these stories are darker than you think. Judy Garland. It's almost impossible to picture classic MGM without Judy Garland, America's darling, the voice that made the yellow brick road famous, and the girl everyone thought had it all. But peel back the Technicolor, and what's left is a story that's more horror show than fairy tale. MGM didn't just discover Judy Garland, they dissected her. At only 13, she was signed as their next big thing. What followed wasn't a meteoric rise, but a slow-motion car crash engineered by men in tailored suits with dollar signs in their eyes. The studio hammered Judy's self-esteem from day one. She was told she was fat, ugly, and unmarketable, words flung at a child, echoing through every audition and every contract meeting. And then came the drugs. To keep her working long hours, MGM doctors handed out amphetamines for breakfast and sleeping pills for dessert. Rest wasn't in the script. Neither was childhood. While her classmates rode bikes and went to dance, Judy was crammed into endless rehearsals, forced to smile through exhaustion, and micromanaged to the point that even her food intake was charted. Every triumph on screen was offset by a crisis behind it. The relentless schedule drove her to collapse, more than once, and filming had to be halted so Judy could recover from nervous breakdowns. Her so-called success chained her to contracts that let MGM rake in millions while she was left with scraps, both emotionally and financially. The pain didn't end when the camera stopped rolling. The psychological scars left Judy vulnerable to addiction, anxiety, and heartbreak, casting a shadow over her adult life. You might see a legend in those old reels, but MGM saw a cash machine, one that would be used up and tossed aside. Judy Garland's real-life yellow brick road led straight to Hollywood's darkest corners. Jackie Cooper. If Judy Garland was the heartbreak behind the music, Jackie Cooper was the grin MGM painted on America's Depression-era gloom. Billed as the boy who never grew up, Jackie became the youngest actor ever nominated for a Best Actor Oscar, at just 9 years old. But what looked like a fairy tale from the outside was a study in cold studio economics on the inside. Jackie's charm was real, but so was the iron grip MGM kept on his life. His contracts, signed before he'd even lost his baby teeth, were marvels of exploitation. The studio dictated his hours, his education, his friends, even his haircuts. If he cried on cue, the bosses cheered. If he got tired, there was always another take, another paycheck to squeeze from his innocence. His own family became part of the machinery. His uncle was his manager, tasked with keeping the factory running smoothly. The pressure cooker reached its boiling point more than once. MGM was notorious for using psychological tricks to get the tears flowing. Once, they threatened to kill Jackie's dog if he didn't cry on screen. It's the kind of motivation that leaves a mark far deeper than any movie script. Jackie was also relentlessly typecast, forced to play the same wide-eyed innocent in picture after picture, as if MGM was terrified to let him grow up at all. When puberty finally hit, the studio lost interest. Jackie was tossed from the A-list to B-movie oblivion, struggling to transition from boy wonder to working adult. Like so many child stars, he carried the baggage of his early years, a career built on exhaustion, manipulation, and the constant threat of being replaced. What's the real lesson here? In the eyes of MGM, Jackie Cooper was never just a kid. He was a product, one that could be sold, rebranded, and discarded the moment he stopped selling tickets. Margaret OBrien. Margaret OBrien was the golden girl of MGM's sentimental weepies, a child so gifted she could cry on cue, and did it so convincingly that studio execs nicknamed her One-Take Maggie. Audiences fell for her sweetness in Meet Me in St. Louis, but the story behind those big, tear-filled eyes was pure, factory-line showbiz. At just 7, O'Brien became the breadwinner for her family, and MGM milked every ounce of emotion she could muster. Childhood wasn't on the call sheet. While other kids were out scraping knees or daydreaming in school, Margaret was memorizing scripts, enduring retake after retake, and living on a diet of studio praise mixed with adult pressure. She was the ultimate professional, yes. But at what cost? The stakes for failure were sky high. MGM's marketing department engineered her image to the last freckle. Press junkets, photo shoots, forced smiles. Nothing about her public persona was accidental. Her mother became both protector and business manager, fiercely fighting for every contract clause while simultaneously making sure her daughter never missed a beat. But even her mom couldn't shield her from the mental and physical toll of life as Hollywood's favorite child crier. There were no tantrums allowed, no off days, and certainly no mistakes. Studio heads treated her like a tiny adult, expecting maturity far beyond her years. And the rewards? Sure, there were awards, an honorary Oscar at 7. But real friends, carefree play, and normal growing pains were sacrificed on the altar of MGM's bottom line. When the public's taste moved on, so did the studio. Margaret OBrien, once their top earner, found herself facing the same cold shoulder given to all child stars outgrowing their marketable cuteness. Her entire youth, traded for box office gold, left a legacy of nostalgia and a blueprint for how to squeeze a child's life into a 2-hour feature. Elizabeth Taylor. Before Elizabeth Taylor became a headline-making icon, she was MGM's porcelain doll, the face that launched 1,000 magazine covers and made National Velvet an instant classic. But if you think Liz had it easy because she was beautiful, think again. At MGM, her beauty wasn't a gift. It was a commodity, strictly managed, branded, and policed for profit. Taylor's journey with MGM started at age 10. She was told to lose weight, reshape her eyebrows, and watch her every move, even as a preteen. The studio was obsessed with her looks to the point of absurdity. One exec famously said, "Her eyes are too old for a child," as if she should apologize for having a soul. She was forced onto restrictive diets, forbidden to ride horses or play sports in case she broke a bone, and denied friendships with unsuitable peers. The studio's control didn't end at the set door. They dictated her public statements, managed her interviews, and shielded her from scandal, so long as she remained their perfect product. Meanwhile, Liz was working adult hours, memorizing lines late into the night, and bearing the brunt of Hollywood gossip before she even hit her teens. Behind the scenes, she suffered from loneliness, exhaustion, and a constant anxiety that she'd slip up and ruin her carefully curated image. Even her health took a hit. Liz battled illnesses, injuries, and stress, often working through pain to keep MGM's machine running. Every smile in those Technicolor classics, engineered for maximum box office impact. As Liz hit adolescence, MGM's demands only increased. Her transition into more mature roles was handled like a corporate rebranding, with no concern for her emotional well-being. Sure, Taylor survived and became a legend, but she paid for it in lost innocence, anxiety, and a lifelong struggle with the expectations MGM burned into her psyche. Rody McDow. Rody McDowell's career at MGM is proof that even the most talented kids could be molded and manipulated until there was nothing left but a studio-approved persona. Brought over from England after wowing critics in How Green Was My Valley, McDowell quickly became MGM's go-to boy for sensitive, tragic roles. But there was nothing gentle about the way the studio handled his life. Rody was barely a teenager when MGM put him on a relentless schedule, movie after movie, press tour after press tour. Barely enough time to catch his breath, let alone go to school or see friends. The studio even advised his mother on what kind of friends he should have, how he should dress off set, and which events he should attend. Privacy? Forget it. Every detail of his existence was curated for maximum public appeal, even down to carefully staged photo ops with co-stars to spark fan magazine rumors. What makes Roddy's story especially haunting is how quickly his individuality was erased. The boy who had a vibrant personality and a sharp sense of humor became, in the public eye, just another tragic-eyed MGM poster child. His Britishness was alternately exoticized and scrubbed away depending on the marketing campaign. He was required to keep up a cheerful front for interviews and fans, even while privately struggling with isolation and homesickness. Behind the cameras, the cost was mounting. McDowell later spoke of his deep loneliness, the pressure to be perfect, and the disorienting effect of being an adult's breadwinner before he was old enough to drive. When Roddy tried to step outside the studio's vision for his career, he was quickly slapped down, denied projects that didn't fit the MGM mold. Roddy McDowell survived the system, but only by reinventing himself as an adult, something most child stars never managed. His early years are a stark reminder. At MGM, even your accent, your smile, your friends, none of it truly belonged to you. Freddy Bartholomew. No child star's American dream turned nightmare quite like Freddy Bartholomew's. Brought across the Atlantic in the 1930s, Freddy was MGM's answer to Shirley Temple, except British, heartbreakingly earnest, and, as it turned out, heartbreakingly expendable. Freddy's early success in tearjerkers like Little Lord Fauntleroy and Captain's Courageous made MGM millions. His innocent charm was irresistible to audiences, and the studio wasted no time capitalizing. They worked him mercilessly, often with back-to-back productions and endless publicity stunts. Offset, his private life was torn apart by custody battles, his parents and an aunt all fighting over who got to manage his earnings. MGM, meanwhile, cared little for Freddy's emotional well-being. So long as he cried beautifully on cue and filled seats, he was golden. The legal battles got so ugly, they became national news, with Freddy's childhood spent more in courtrooms than classrooms. MGM used the chaos to tighten their grip, leveraging his contractual obligations to keep him working, sometimes even threatening to send him back to England if he didn't toe the line. The stress weighed heavily. Freddy's mother reportedly pressured him to keep working to fund their lifestyle, while studio execs played family members off each other for leverage. All the while, MGM made sure to project an image of family values, even as they profited from Freddy's misery. By the time his star began to fade, inevitably, as he grew older, Freddy was left with little to show for his sacrifice, but bitterness and a legacy of courtroom drama. The innocence audiences loved was never truly his. It was a performance, purchased and packaged by MGM for maximum return. The lesson? In Hollywood, imported talent was just as disposable as homegrown, and Freddy's tears lined the pockets of everyone but himself. Jane Powell. Jane Powell embodied the all-American girl next door in MGM musicals. Sunny, wholesome, with a voice that could charm the birds from the trees. But behind that Broadway smile was a childhood as tightly scripted and stage-managed as any musical number. Powell was just 16 when MGM signed her, and they immediately locked her into a rigorous routine. Her days began with vocal exercises and ended with late-night rehearsals, with almost every waking hour accounted for by studio handlers. Social life? Only if it fit the studio's brand. Jane was forbidden to date certain boys, discouraged from making friends outside the Hollywood bubble, and even instructed on what to wear off set to maintain the good girl image. Every performance was high stakes. One missed note or bad review could spell disaster. MGM executives monitored her weight, looks, and even mannerisms, terrified that any whiff of scandal or unmarketable behavior would spoil their investment. The pressure seeped into every corner of her life. Powell later admitted to feeling anxious, isolated, and perpetually on the verge of burnout. Publicly, she was sold as the ideal teenager, Talented, polite, always smiling. Privately, she wrestled with depression and a desperate longing for normalcy. Her own identity was so buried under MGM's expectations that even as an adult, Jane struggled to figure out who she was outside the studio's narrative. When audiences moved on and the musical craze faded, MGM dropped her without a backward glance. Jane Powell's story isn't just about lost childhood. It's about how the very qualities that made her a star were systematically squeezed, polished, and packaged until there was nothing left but a memory. For MGM, her youth was a resource, there to be mined, then forgotten. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney wasn't just an MGM child star. He was the studio's goldmine. With a boyish grin and boundless energy, Rooney headlined the Andy Hardy series and dozens of musicals, quickly becoming one of the highest-paid and most exploited young actors in the world. But all that box office gold came at a price no kid should ever pay. From the time he could barely tie his shoes, Rooney was handed adult responsibilities and temptations. MGM made sure he was always working, often juggling multiple films at once. Sleep. That was for people who didn't have the studio's quarterly profits riding on their shoulders. Executives monitored every aspect of his life, from his diet to his dating life, much of it arranged for publicity. The message was clear. Mickey wasn't a kid. He was a brand. The pressure was relentless. But MGM wasn't satisfied with just money. They wanted headlines. When Rooney started to grow out of his cherubic roles, the studio panicked. They encouraged him to maintain a childlike persona, even as he hit his teens, feeding him a steady diet of amphetamines and sleeping pills to keep up the frantic pace. While Rooney tried to please everyone, bosses, fans, and his own family, his real needs were ignored. He would later say he felt used up and spat out, emotionally and physically battered by the constant demands. And when his youthful spark faded and the public moved on, MGM wasted no time replacing him. Rooney's adult life was a roller coaster of marriages, financial disasters, and struggles with addiction, echoes of a childhood lost to the studio's insatiable hunger for profit. He became a cautionary tale for Hollywood excess, not because he failed, but because he was never allowed to be anything but a money-making machine. For MGM, Mickey Rooney was the ultimate investment, squeezed dry, thrown aside, and remembered only when it was time to cash in on nostalgia. Deanna Durban. Before she found her biggest fame at Universal, Deanna Durban's brief but significant stint at MGM showcased just how quickly a child's dreams could be sacrificed to corporate power games. Signed as a preteen, Durban was seen as the next big musical prodigy, with a voice that could melt even the hardest executive's heart. But MGM didn't want another child star. They wanted insurance. Deanna was paired with another rising singer, Judy Garland, in the short Every Sunday. The studio planned to drop one and keep the other. Executives pitted them against each other, turning talent into a high-stakes cage match. When the dust settled, Garland stayed, and Durban was quietly cut loose, not because of a lack of talent, but because the studio could only market one ingenue at a time. But even in her brief time at MGM, Durban experienced the full force of the studio system. Exhausting schedules, strict image control, and the ever-present threat of being discarded. She was pressured to conform to the studio's standards, from wardrobe to the way she spoke in interviews. There was no space for individuality or self-expression. Deanna was a product, and if she didn't sell, she'd be gone. Ironically, it was being dropped that set her free. Durban's move to Universal made her a global superstar and gave her a bit more control over her destiny. But the scars remained. She spent her later years fiercely guarding her privacy and refusing to let Hollywood dictate her life ever again. The experience left her wary, even resentful, of the industry that once saw her as little more than a bargaining chip. MGM's treatment of Deanna Durban is a classic case. Even the brightest talent meant nothing if it couldn't be monetized. And if you wonder why so many child stars vanished without explanation, this is where their stories begin, and too often, where they end. Bonita Granville. Bonita Granville was the original Nancy Drew, the face of clever, intrepid girlhood in a string of MGM-backed mysteries. She became America's favorite girl detective. But what looked like an enviable career was actually a master class in corporate exploitation and arrested development. Granville was signed young and pushed straight into the spotlight, with MGM controlling every step she took, both on and off the screen. She was kept on a rigorous shooting and publicity schedule, with little time for real friends or genuine experiences. The studio's PR machine churned out a relentless stream of press appearances, staged photographs, and girl-next-door interviews. Bonita was less a person than a walking, talking advertisement for wholesome fun. But MGM's vision for Granville didn't include letting her grow up. As she moved into her teens, executives panicked at the idea of their child detective turning into an actual young woman. Rather than craft mature roles or allow her to evolve, they doubled down on the same formula, forcing Bonita to play versions of herself long after she'd outgrown the part. Her creative input? Non-existent. Her hopes for more complex characters? Dismissed as irrelevant. The emotional toll was heavy. Bonita's career options narrowed as she got older, and she struggled with the same identity crisis that haunted so many child stars. Who was she, if not MGM's eternally perky Nancy Drew? With the studio's backing gone, her career quickly sputtered, and Hollywood moved on without a second thought. In the end, Bonita Granville's greatest mystery wasn't the one she solved on screen. It was how to escape the role MGM forced on her. Like so many child stars, her real coming-of-age story never made it to the screen. Tommy Reddig. Tommy Reddig might not be as instantly recognizable as some of MGM's other child stars, but his story is a haunting echo of the system's ruthless efficiency. Cast in a string of MGM films in the late 1940s and early 1950s, Reddig was a fresh-faced, reliable kid with an everyman quality the studio loved until they didn't. Reddig's experience with MGM was a microcosm of everything wrong with the studio system. He was given grueling schedules, shipped from one set to another, and expected to deliver adult-level professionalism on a child's body and mind. Days blurred into weeks. Holidays and birthdays were often spent memorizing lines or smiling for the press. His parents, like so many others, were pressured to keep him compliant, to remember the big picture, and never to complain, lest he lose his spot on the MGM carousel. While MGM's marketing painted Reddig as a plucky, happy-go-lucky kid, the truth was much bleaker. He felt isolated, confused, and increasingly detached from real life. Studio execs brushed off his struggles as growing pains, but Reddig's mental health steadily deteriorated as the demands piled up. By the time his big break as the star of Lassie for another studio arrived, Tommy had already developed a deep resentment for Hollywood. He later spoke openly about his battles with depression and substance abuse, tracing their roots back to his childhood, spent under the harsh glare of MGM's lights. After leaving acting, Reddig spent years trying to find normalcy, a real life away from the cameras and false smiles. He became a software engineer, advocate for former child stars, and a cautionary tale for parents considering show business. His story, often overshadowed by bigger names, is a brutal reminder. For every famous child actor, there are dozens whose lives are left in pieces when the studio is finished with them. At MGM, Tommy Reddig was never allowed to be a kid, and he spent the rest of his life trying to reclaim what the studio stole. Virginia Widler. Virginia Widler was MGM's secret comedic weapon, a pint-sized dynamo with razor-sharp timing, and a face made for the silver screen. Cast alongside Hollywood giants in classics like The Philadelphia Story, Widler was often the highlight of any scene, tossing out quips that put adults to shame. But behind the curtain, her quick wit and big personality did little to protect her from the studio's cold, bottom-line approach. From an early age, Widler was slotted into the smart-mouthed kid mold. MGM loved her sass and energy, but they wanted it on command, 24/7. Her childhood became a series of long workdays, publicity events, and endless rehearsals. School and friendships were afterthoughts. Executives coached her not just in acting, but in how to behave, what to say, even how to laugh in interviews. Every natural impulse shaped to fit MGM's script. As Virginia neared adolescence, the very qualities that made her a sensation became liabilities in the eyes of the studio. They didn't know what to do with a young woman who was too clever, too independent, too real for their sanitized images. Offers slowed to a trickle. After her 16th birthday, MGM all but abandoned her, giving her no support, no meaningful roles, and certainly no help transitioning to adult stardom. Widler's abrupt exit from Hollywood was as ruthless as any MGM business decision. One day, she was everywhere. The next, she was a footnote. She retired before age 18, leaving behind a trail of wisecracks and a quiet, private life. Fans remembered her as the scene stealer. Insiders saw just another casualty of a system that discarded kids the moment they stopped being profitable. Virginia Widler's real story isn't just about lost fame. It's about lost potential. The countless joys and choices a child forfeits when every moment is orchestrated by someone else's dollar sign dreams. So, what does it say about Hollywood's golden age that its brightest child stars paid such a heavy price for our entertainment? MGM may have made legends, but behind every success was a kid learning that childhood came second to studio profits. Which story hit you the hardest? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this video if you think these stories deserve a wider audience. And don't forget to subscribe for more untold Hollywood truths. Here's the real twist. Some childhood scars never fade, no matter how much glitter you throw on the marquee.